Start. Okay, good morning. So next, as usual, Sergey, do you want to start today's meeting with some like pool status and the cap status?
Okay, thank you. It's SIG Node meeting. It's September 29th. Hi, everybody. Good Tuesday. So we making stable progress downwards on number of PRs, but it's not a super fast progress. This week we have closed, most of PRs being closed are actively closed, which is good. Very little was rotten. And yeah, yesterday on SIG test meeting, we discussed, or SIG test group, we discussed that some with test-related PRs are not merged, not approved very fast. So I will start poking folks around with the test PRs. So please pay more attention. We have 3 pages of PRs in the area test, and they're not like, they're just slowly rotten away. So I will start poking people around with those tests, with those PRs, because they are quite important for release. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergey. So is those like the test PR related PR is blocked by the which SIG? Like the what link of the approval is from our SIG or is it from the SIG test?
So in most cases, it needs somebody from our SIG node and somebody from test. So yeah, it's very different. Like test area is quite diverse.
Okay. Okay. So it looks like we have to pay extra attention here. Yeah. Okay. So next one, David, do you want to talk about the first topic, the node shutdown cap?
Yeah, sure. Can I maybe share my screen if it's okay? Can you enable that?
Yeah, let me give you.
Thanks.
Please, who want to share the screen, let me know, and I grant you the host.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Cool. All right. It should be sharing, I think. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about this cap. Thanks so much for Derek and Don for already taking a look, and Sergey and a couple other folks. So a little background. This is something me and Mrinal have been working on. So I'll go over briefly. So the idea here is we want to add support for the kubelet to make sure that the kubelet's aware of the underlying node shutdown. So today, kind of the problem is that when the machine shuts down, like kubelet's not aware of it, so pods just kind of terminate, and the underlying init system on the node will basically kill kubelet and kill all the pods, and stuff like your pre-stop hooks and termination grace period is usually not respected. So the proposal here is basically to integrate with the init system, specifically with systemd, so that kubelet's aware of the underlying node shutdown, and it can basically like pause the shutdown and then actually shut down the pods gracefully and execute the pre-stop hooks and all that stuff. So there's more detail here. I won't go into every piece of detail, but basically the idea here is on Linux, like there's a lot of ways you can shut down a machine, right? Like you can just call a shutdown command, or call if you're using systemd, you can do systemctl power off, and then each cloud provider also has its ability to like stop your underlying VM if you're on the cloud provider. But usually what happens underneath is this results into like an ACPI event. And so ACPI events are traditionally handled by some type of daemon running on the Linux VMs or on the Linux machine. So it used to be like something called ACPID, and now it's systemd, specifically login from systemd kind of handles that event on most distros. So basically the proposal here is to make use of this thing called inhibitor locks, which is a feature in systemd that was released in 183 systemd in 2012. So it's been around for quite a while at this point. And this feature basically allows an application to basically request some amount of time from systemd to delay the shutdown by, and then also get a notification that the shutdown has begun. And then it can delay the shutdown by some number of seconds, and then it can do whatever it wants during those period of seconds. So the proposal is basically kubelet will use this inhibitor lock mechanism to ask systemd to delay the shutdown by some configurable period of time. And then during that period of time, it'll actually gracefully kind of terminate all the pods on the machine. It'll give them some certain grace period that we'll talk about quickly, and then the machine just proceeds with its normal shutdown. So that's kind of the idea here. And so the kind of idea here is we're going to introduce like a new field in kubla config shutdown grace period, and the user will specify this, or the cluster administrator, that is. And basically for each pod, like this is the time we'll try to request from systemd to delay the shutdown by. And then for each pod, we'll get its inhibit, or basically from the pod spec, we'll get like the termination grace period seconds right here, as I described. And we'll basically give each pod a minimum of the termination grace period or the shutdown grace period. So the idea here is that the pod might, like, we want to handle some cases like preemptible VMs, for example, on cloud providers that provide only like 30 seconds for a VM to shut down. And each cloud provider has its kind of equivalent to that, or 2 minutes or something like that. And so your pod spec might actually request more than that. So the proposal here is that we'll basically just give as much as we can, whether that's the shutdown grace period that actually the cloud provider provides, like 30 seconds, or whatever the pod spec is. So the minimum between those two. And then the other thing that the KEP touches on here is we want to shut down in order a little bit. So like when you're shutting down all the pods in your machine, some are actually critical, like your logging daemon. You want to make sure that your logging daemon exits last, so that like during shutdown, you get all your logs propagated and stuff. So the idea here is actually to make use of these priority classes. And so pods can today have a priority, and there's actually some well-known priorities called system cluster critical and system node critical. And we expect that stuff like those logging daemons will have a priority class of that. And then for those specific ones, we'll shut them down last. So we'll allocate some period of time at the end, and first shut down your user pods, and then shut down the kind of cluster critical pods. And then, yeah, and then basically we'll use some existing functionality in kubla, like this kill pod function, which is being used in general to kill pods. So that already handles pre-stop hooks and the expected pod termination lifecycle, like sig term and all that stuff. So I guess what I wanted to discuss with the community here is a couple questions. First of all, like if anyone's interested, I would love any more feedback here. A couple things that we wanted to discuss that I saw some questions about. First of all, we wanted to make sure that this, I guess one of the things I wanted to do is kind of minimize the amount of design that's like, or configuration that's required. So only provide one kind of tunable knob, which is shutdown grace period. However, there's kind of a trade-off, because like we want to allocate different amount of time for the critical pods and then for your user pods. So what I kind of suggested in the KEP is we'll just hard code 2 seconds as the default shutdown period for system critical pods. And this is kind of defined to be like the minimum in the kubelet. If you don't specify any grace period, it's 2 seconds by default, and kubelet is what we default to today. So I guess I wanted to understand if people think that's actually worth configuring as a separate option, or whether we should stick with that. So that was kind of one question. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that when I read it. This is Derek. So, or I didn't connect the dots the way I should. So, I had assumed that the flow proposed was basically kubelet gets the shutdown event. It goes and tells systemd to hold off for X period of time. Then we would go and try to shut down all non-critical pods first. And so the shutting down a critical pod second, I'm trying to think if 2 seconds would be bad. So like, I think trying to think through what many people would view as critical pods, and it'd be like logging daemons, the network. Mm-hmm. Where if you don't have ordering among them, then like, maybe 2 seconds is too harsh anyway to shut them down, depending on what the work is. But like, if you can't depend on 2 of them together, maybe it's not the end of the world either. I guess for me, I would prefer we just give them more than 2 seconds, and we say it's like, I don't know. Yeah, you get to 2 flags then.
Yeah. I guess because the issue is, so in some cloud provider, like on Google Cloud, for example, for preemptible VMs, we get 30 seconds to shut down. So every kind of second counts.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to prioritize, users' workloads, right? Getting the most amount of time. So, but I understand on other providers, or if you're doing it on bare metal, you kind of maybe can have more flexibility there. So I don't know, maybe it should be something configurable, but then it requires more flags. So I don't know.
Another way to do it is just go through the list of pods that are critical on the node, figure out what the maximum grace period seconds is, and then subtract that from the total time, so that you have the longest grace period critical pod remainder at the end of the thing. And in most situations, normal users can't create cluster critical pods, so you'd be kind of guarded against someone just creating a pod with a really long grace period termination seconds.
Yeah, I think like that works only issues with when you have 30-second shutdown, but I guess in that situation you don't care as much anyways.
Yeah, in the peer review, the CAP review, I did raise that 2 seconds, but I understand what that 2 seconds came from. That 2 seconds came from, it is the previous release, and there's the 2 seconds being predefined for this one. So, but I did, David, I did mention that I think about the things we are redesigning this shutdown logic, so maybe we need to put more thoughts about that 2 seconds there. So maybe make that configurable, or maybe for when quit off the cluster, and or maybe add the node pool level. But anyway, just per node, tuneable.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to make it more configurable potentially. Yeah.
Just raise that one in your CAP about this one. Another problem I have, the big problem, it is that okay for all the situation? We basically overwrite that default node config, right? Because through the Kubernetes config, I'm okay, because to me, from the long time Kubernetes node, I call keyload. So like the Kubernetes should be driving a lot of decision, but I'm not sure in all the situation, use cases that's acceptable. So that's why I think what we should mention is at the
Yeah. So another thing to bring up, as Don mentioned. So the way this works is we need to request some amount of time from systemd to delay the shutdown by. And so the default in systemd, I believe, is 5 seconds. It's this inhibit delay max second. It's like a property under login that's configured like on your distro. And so the default I've seen like on Debian and Ubuntu and stuff is 5 seconds. But if the user would pass in something else for kubla config, the proposal here is we'll basically go in and write a config file to login and update that value and kind of send a sig hub to login and just refresh the value. So that's kind of what Don's referring to here, is that kubla is kind of controlling that value of login. So I guess we wanted to check what people's thoughts were on that.
Hey David, like I had a quick question around, would it be possible for kubelet to send an event out saying that the node is going to shut down?
When you say event, I guess, in what do you mean by that?
So I think like a lot of controllers or operators around Kubernetes could, accept an event, maybe on a channel or something. That would be a great addition. Like maybe we can even this is done on Linux priority based shutdown, right? Like even minus 19 being the highest priority for stuff to get done.
Yes. So what do you mean when you say priority? You're talking about the pod priority, or sorry, maybe I didn't catch.
I know that Linux has a priority level set between -20 and +20, and the negative value seems to be the highest priority the application takes.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're talking about Linux. Yeah, I don't think this actually will change that, because it'll simply ask systemd, like everything will continue running as is. It'll just simply delay the shutdown by that period of time. So it shouldn't actually change any of the priorities, like the underlying processes or anything like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So about the event thing, would it be possible? Like I would love to contribute if possible.
Yeah. Regarding events, so that's actually another thing I wanted to bring up briefly. If you're referring to like event inside a kubelet, we can probably make that some way that other components can hook into. In terms of like events that could be seen like on the API server or controllers running elsewhere, one idea that we also had was to add like a taint or potentially a condition. I guess this is another question I wanted to bring up. We wanted to make sure that like during shutdown, new pods aren't being scheduled, right? Because since the node is going to shut down anyway, we don't want new pods being scheduled there. So I guess the question is, should we maybe taint? I haven't seen this kind of pattern, but maybe the kubelet should taint itself. But then I guess the question becomes, what will remove the taint later? Or potentially this is worth adding a new node condition, like a node is shutting down condition or something like that. And I guess the controllers could hook into something like that by reading the taint or potentially a condition or something like that on the node. It's kind of one idea for an event like that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to ask another question, maybe Don, Derek, if you have any thoughts in terms of like communicating this up to the API server. What's kind of the pattern? Because I haven't seen kubelet like taint itself as a pattern. Maybe is this worth, do you think, a new node condition, or should the kubelet try to taint itself? Or I don't know, do you have any thoughts on the best way to represent that?
There's many effort. So people don't want to add more node condition. I mean, that's more from the API perspective, but we never consensus at that one. So I saw that Brian through the chat add a comment, say, ask a question. Brian, do you want to clarify your question here? I think this is related to the taint and the condition, all those things. And Alexandra also asked the same question on the condition.
Sure. It seems like there's a couple of things that could be done. Like the kubelet, when it detects it shuts down, it could coordinate itself and then set it to drain to get, and it should automatically clean up all the pods off it at that point. But the other thing would be to go ahead and set a node condition, yeah, that marks it as not ready. Yeah, that's about all I can think of. But.
Yeah, so I think we have to separate the two use cases that might motivate this action occurring. So one would be just anyone who's running Kubernetes on Metal as an example, where they would drain but ignore daemon sets, but then still power cycle the box. And so that flow, the node's already probably cordoned. It's already gone through a drain. It's just the remaining daemons that are running there are not integrated in the shutdown sequence. And so like, from that perspective, like giving that maintenance activity 2 seconds for things that are critical is kind of artificial.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
And so there's a lot of folks running Kubernetes in that fashion. So want to account for them. And then the other one, the preemptible phase where you are time bound, that's the scenario where you are likely not to be drained, but that varies per cloud actually. So I can't remember how everyone integrates with that, but it definitely does vary per cloud, per distribution. I still think many of those environments would still mark to drain the node, and this is kind of a backstop.
Yeah, so like, for example, like we, in terms of the cloud aspect, so like, usually there isn't enough time like to actually drain, like by the time someone detects that the node is shutting down and actually draining, it's like too late in those time bound situations. That's kind of why kubelet, the proposal here is kubelet's the one actually, you know, aware of that event. And then in terms of like the cloud providers, so each cloud provider often has like a metadata server that it can reach out to itself on the VM. But that's cloud provider kind of specific, right? The benefit here is that this is just hooking directly into the ACPI event, which works across in every cloud, you know, and bare metal as well. So that's kind of the idea.
Yeah. So I guess to the question of conditions or anything like that right now, like I don't feel like we need a new condition yet because I don't know how it would monitor on it. Versus like I don't view it as a blocker to making progress on that. Like I think it's worth getting feedback on how people choose to monitor power cycles across particular environments on how that condition would actually provide them value. Because if it's a bare metal case and that machine reboots 15 minutes later, it might already go not ready and it'll already integrate in their monitoring environments, or at least node status unknown. So basically, I would table this to a separate topic.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we can discuss more of that offline, whether that's worth creating a taint or a condition. Okay.
What people suggest, just mark once you receive this one, and then you send the terminate of those non-critical of the pod, and you should be then send a status back and mark of the node is not ready. So once the node is not ready, there's no, so we don't need to introduce the new mechanism here and no new conditional. And in that not ready, I remember we do have like a message to say clarify detail why it is not ready. So you could totally say, oh, receive of the shutdown and the event. So there's another thing the Mark mentioned that Windows from the chat. I think that's the reason. So let's include that one at least, not necessarily blocker for the alpha feature, but we need to have the to-do for like later. So that
for sure.
Windows,
yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, maybe it just makes sense to mark the node not ready, and we can simplify a lot of this stuff. That's a great idea. Yeah, and yeah, okay. And then the other thing I guess I wanted to mention in terms of the design here. So we're making use of the systemd inhibitors, right? But it makes sense, as Mark mentioned in the chat, to make this a little bit more extensible, like behind the interface or something like that, that could be implemented by potentially other init systems or on Windows. So that's kind of the other thing I'm thinking about. But yeah, I guess if anyone else has any feedback or anything else like that, would appreciate any comments on the cap. But thanks so much for everyone for looking at it so far. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions. If otherwise, we can just go offline on the.
Yeah, I guess is this something that we're able to make forward progress on if we can iron out the last remaining questions in 120? Like, is this something Bernal or David you're able to help push the implementation forward on?
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to help on the implementation side. I'm not sure necessarily timeline-wise if 120 is realistic or not, but definitely 120, 121 is kind of my what I'm aiming for.
Okay, I just want to make sure that like we have the corresponding issue open, that the milestone was labeled, that like we can get all the I's and T's dotted and crossed before the 6th. Or
okay.
whenever the end.
Got it. And the 6th, just by the way, it's deadline for, sorry, what's that?
The KEP is merged and added into the 120 milestone.
Got it. Okay. Got it. So yeah, we can probably make progress toward that, and then I'm sure we can go in and change anything if needed in the KEP even after we merge it. So it should be okay.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you.
David, would love to chat more about the eventing thing, maybe over Slack or something.
Yeah, feel free to ping me on Slack. Cool.
Yeah. Hashi, I want to mention that if I understand you correctly, you are just suggest the risk of the
I'm sorry, your voice is
event to shut down. So I think with that doable, but the use cases are more. One thing. So if I understand you correctly, you just asked her to doing this because of the Kubernetes events to API server. So we totally can do, and that should be straightforward. But my concern it is because you also mentioned some logical and doing that using that event. I just want to say like the Kubernetes event is the best effort. I just want to say I want to make sure no control really depend on the event unless. So it is supportability Kubernetes event. No, it's not guaranteed today. I lost everyone.
Yeah, so I think I got the gist. So the use case which I had in mind for eventing is that before a node shutdowns, if it can just tell any controller that the controller might be running on the master node and if the controller knows, it can know what to do with the CRDs or whatever it's controlling, So that's what I had in mind.
So Hashi, I just say you cannot depend on the event. But we just talk about maybe send one more status. So tell the node is not ready and give you the reason why it's not ready. You might be want based on that one. Your controller based on the node status. It's not based on the events. Event is not guaranteed.
Right.
So that's why I want to brought up to you, because I heard you ask event and then there's the controller want to rely on this one. That will be error prone because we talk about event is not guaranteed. Yeah. So,
okay.
Thanks. So let's move to next.
Yeah.
Thanks. Let's move to the next topic. Kevin, do you want to talk about the status update of the memory manager? I saw the direct add comment there.
Yeah, so I don't know if we want to go through the updates. I haven't seen the latest iteration since my prior review, but if everything was updated, that's awesome.
Like I believe most part was updated, and if you want to discuss, to have some additional discussion regarding kernel memory, like we can do it now if no one has any
it'd be great
objections.
if were you able to get an outcome on that or a recommendation?
Like again, because from what I saw, it's like it can bring additional problems if you will like just disable it via kernel arguments. So I know that the kernel 5.9 already should include the fix, and probably it should be backported. But until now, we can provide some section under the pod resources guaranteed, like to give people know that they probably will need to request more memory that the real workload under the container needs because the kernel memory also calculated as part of the container memory, and if you have like a lot of CPUs, so you probably will have a lot of kernel memory used and summarized under the container. So like I can prepare some section under the documentation if it's good enough. What do you think, Derek?
Okay, I guess I'll review the latest comments, but for the question on, it's good to know that we think things will be improved on a later kernel, and I'll take a look at that. But for was the overhead of KMM accounting reduced when CPU sets were being restricted? I don't know if that was resolved but I'll take a look. Either way, some of these issues are still pertinent to just how normal memory accounting works in Cube. So it necessarily wasn't a blocker, but more of a thing that I wanted to make sure that we were aware of as people get ever increasing guarantees from Cube. So anyway, I'll take a look. So thanks for the updates.
Thank you.
There are small couple of comments as well, which was not addressed in the latest iteration of SCAP.
Sure. The comment regarding the NUMA node without CPU at all, right, Alexandra?
Well, that was one, and second one regarding the text part about physical NUMA node, which doesn't make sense on the hardware.
Okay, I will recheck comments and I will answer. Sorry if I missed it.
Okay, thanks. Please take another look and follow.
Sorry, there was also another issue related to exposing metrics in Kubernetes to show NUMA related stuff, and it was addressed for better release of the memory manager. So that if you also could look at that besides the kernel memory counting issue, because I think these are two major issues that should be discussed for better release. And yeah, that's everything I wanted to highlight. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'll take another review on the latest updates either this afternoon or tomorrow morning, and we'll try to at least get this kept into a mergeable state to meet an alpha target. I know there's a lot of desire to move forward on this, and so just looking at the comments here, I can see some stuff got recommended for moving to a beta phase and that type of thing.
Great, thanks.
Okay, let's move topic. And earlier I accidentally skip off the Windows privilege container discussing. So let's, Mark, do you want to bring this topic? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think Amber on the call can help lead the discussion.
Yeah, so I wanted to give kind of a quick update. So we have the KEP that's currently still in a Google Doc, but it's getting converted to an MD file for us to put in the PR, hopefully sometime today. Some big updates kind of on the designer investigation front. One of the original design components of the way we had it currently listed in the KEP was that we were only enabling either all privileged pods or like not enabling kind of mixed privileged and non-privileged pods. From further conversation and scenario discussion, we realized that there were several scenarios where mixed privileged and non-privileged pods were necessary. But in our current implementation, that would result in a break in kind of the network compartments that the privileged containers and the non-privileged containers would belong to within the same pod. So it would kind of go against some of the basic assumptions of pods in Kubernetes. So as a part of that investigation, we were looking into ways that we could have a privileged container align with a pod's network compartment in the Windows implementation. However, we also discovered a separate scenario, which is around service meshes, where there are init containers that are ephemeral, that are privileged containers that might be deployed to non-privileged pods. That may require kind of host network access. So in the scenario where we do succeed in the first step of trying to align privileged containers with the network compartment of a non-privileged pod, that might block this other scenario with init containers where it still requires kind of host access. So we're trying to address kind of these two investigation points, which kind of one leads to another. So that's kind of an ongoing investigation. Our current plan is to still kind of move forward to see if we can get at least, our KEP in a situation where we can PR it and see if we can find ways to kind of close out some of those items. But that's kind of the current status update.
So I had put questions on the Google Doc. Maybe is that being? Are those what's the plan on this one? I guess are we trying to get all the questions resolved in the Google Doc before the KEP officially gets open?
Yeah. So as a part of, I'm either making edits in the Google Doc, which I then transfer into the MD file that's kind of being created now. Hopefully after today or after that conversion, we're just going to go off of an MD file and not kind of work with the Google Doc anymore. So those things are getting slowly kind of incorporated in. I'm making my way down the doc right now.
Okay. And then the hope was to get this in this coming release?
Yeah, that's still the hope. Though I mentioned that these kind of two scenarios that came up with the pod networking, those were things that really, we really had to take a look at next week. So it is coming in rather hot for 120. We're still going to try to pursue that, but if not, we do want to kind of still have this kept in a provisional state, or see if there's some kind of, some kind of way to still provide this to the community in some state within this kind of time frame. We're still trying to assess whether or not like these networking issues or whatever path we kind of take to remedy that for now, or if that would require kind of significant API changes. We don't want to have to roll those API changes back, whichever path we choose. And if we can find a way to do that in 120 that allows us to address these issues either now or in the coming time frame without like significant changes to those APIs again, that's what we would hope for. But that's kind of still under assessment since it kind of came up recently.
Those two problems actually is pretty critical to solve this, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
so,
it's pretty critical. We're having some discussions as to what is the nature of making those things possible. And I think one thing that would help us is, and we kind of brought this up in SIG Windows as well, is so we're familiar with one kind of init container scenario where there's an ephemeral privileged container deployed to a non-privileged pod. I think we're looking to find out other scenarios that might pertain to like other service meshes or other kind of scenarios of that nature, so we can get a broader picture of these two kind of scenarios that seem a little bit at odds with each other's on the implementation that we might be able to take. Yeah, so I think that would help. They are critical, which is why I think we're trying to assess, assess if we have if we see a path forward kind of in this time frame or not, and if we don't, what we can do kind of in the interim to still have some of this functionality like continue to be refined or tested or provided to people.
Yeah, I think we definitely like to move the discussion out of the Google Doc and put it into a KEP and merge that, even if it is in the provisional state. So just to iterate kind of more in a place where people would expect these discussions and documents to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the Mark and here and also I know we don't support all the use cases, but if we could work out scope out like the initial release and also support a certain like end-to-end of the use cases for this, and so then we can present to our user. And so that's kind of like give us like the earlier Amber you just mentioned that the certain use cases we still unknown, we still try to explore. So if we could do something like then we maybe can allow more feedback, more customer inputs. That's also value. But it looks like right now we even haven't figured out what's the initial scope yet. So that's a little bit concerned. So because we just have a couple of days for deadline to accept this one. So we will see. Like I agree with the Matt. Let's at least present this in CAP format, right? Standard CAP format, and mark as the provisioning stage, and then allow the community to share more use cases and more feedback there. So maybe that's good.
Yeah, and like a lot of this work is going to kind of need changes to both like the Kubernetes API and the objects that users interact with and the CRI. And I think right now we're trying to make sure that we have us like we can identify all of the proposed CRI changes to not have to change that between an alpha and a beta implementation.
Yes.
Maybe if you can give special call out to that. We did meet on CRI discussions, and Mernal and Mike Brown were putting together a doc. If there's anything you find that's backward compatible, it would be good to elevate that as soon as possible. But I'm assuming, I think everything that was there was hopefully forward compatible changes you wanted to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the use case that Amber brought up, I think may change some of the proposed designs about for the CRI. So we're trying to reconcile that with any continuity changes or that we would need and how to pass the information through. But yes, we'll keep that up to date.
Okay, thanks, Amber and Matt. So I need to check off the time a little bit. So next topic is Meta about the image ID, container image ID for the downward API. So Meta, earlier I make you co-host in case you want to listen, because I know we asked you to last week.
Yes, hi. I think given the time limits today that we are running out of time, I would just invite everyone to check out the CAP and leave comments there. I mostly try to include everything we discussed last time and more detailed proposal. So yeah, I'm not completely sure about the process here, but I assume some comments and reviews should be done. And so I would like just to invite those if anyone can do that.
If I remember correctly, last time one of the questions raised, it is more clear of the use cases, right? So put the use cases user story into your CAP. Do you want to talk about that one, or maybe we don't?
Sure.
We don't have enough time, so we can move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, let me then share screen and just to quickly I can show them as well while I talk. Do you see GitHub?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I mostly describe two user stories. So one is really about debugging and logging support, so that the container itself can send or logs or to the user end user or to the some logging system, and can include information who is exactly logging this. And the other user story is here about reproducibility, in the sense that if you have a science a community like we have it at our university, running Kubernetes as a job system to trigger jobs to run on some data. Generally, they reuse pod descriptions with some latest stack on Docker image, but on the other hand, you want to log inside of the container then what exactly, which exactly the image was picked. The latest does not always refer to the same underlying image, and so having this information available, easily through the down to the API, like an environment variable, the underlying container code could then log that or store it with, for example, information what was input to the job on the output of the data. I mean, into the output of that job. So those are the two main use cases I have, and if anyone wants to tell me more about their use cases, I can also add those. But those are two mine from my side.
I haven't read your CAP yet, and I need that internalize your use cases more. So anyone have comment?
I'm just trying to understand as well what the scenario is. It sounds like you've got some image metadata that you want to expose up through the container spec. Is that correct?
I mean, it's not the image metadata. It's literally the gist of the image. So the ID of the image, the hash, so that at the later time you can rerun the same thing, or that you can really know what exactly the image was used. So if you are debugging something, like right. When the user reports an issue and you want to bring up exactly the same environment they had when they got error, the easiest way if you have a hash-based Docker image.
Yeah,
you know,
I think we reply back what the image ID is, and that is the SHA, right? The hash for
exactly.
it.
And so
is not currently available in the inspect or something, or where is it missing?
okay, so yeah, the issue is it is available outside of the container. And so what I'm proposing is to allow it to be available inside of the container. So if you have download API already in the Kubernetes, and it allows you know, a nice list of things to be available downstream, like resources, limits, and stuff. But you cannot get information about the image which is being run. So you know, you have an image being run, but you cannot get information into the container.
Yeah, you're not. It's not that particular API is not showing the image ID. Okay.
Yeah, and so I would like image and digest of the image or image ID. I mean, both image name and image ID, just for completeness. Right. And I think it's pretty, you know, very similar.
I've actually seen, just a heads up, I've seen some people just putting the SHA there for the image instead of putting a, you know, a colon tag there.
Yes, you can do that if you know in advance what the SHA is.
Right.
But if you use the latest tag or something like that, then only the Kubernetes knows what was resolved.
Yeah. Fair. Okay. Yeah, have you taken a look at the inspect to see if it's there for the container?
Yeah. So yeah, it is from outside you get it. So literally, you know, I mean, it is already in the status container. So it's already available to the API. Only it's available outside, not inside.
Okay.
So Kubernetes already exposes that already.
Yeah, I'm just not familiar with the API. That's not where it's not being exposed. So
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so looks like we need to review your cap and to think about more and thanks Smita. So we will follow up your cap and is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And next one, Sergey, do you want to talk about the two topics you propose here?
Yeah, we don't have much time left on the meeting, but those are very small topics. So first one is Andrew wrote this cap, and it's exactly what we discussed 2 or 3 meetings back here. It's about timeouts on exact probes. So we want to start respecting them, and this cap introduces a flag that fixes this bug as we identified it gradually, so you can disable and return back to previous behavior. So it's very simple cap, very small, and we will appreciate if you review and approve it. Any questions here? Okay then.
Dawn, do you want to review this, or shall I? I'm just I had no
I
issue.
just before this meeting, I told the Sergey I want to take one more look about this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Derek, you wasn't on that meeting when we discussed it, so it may be beneficial for you just to glance over. But in a nutshell, it just neither on Docker or containerd we respected timeout specified on probes when it's exact probe. So we just want to start respecting them, even though process that will be run inside the container will not be killed. So we will this is only gotcha that we need to people to be aware of.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was on at least one of the conversations about this. So anyway, Dawn, I'm happy to let you take the final look.
Thanks. I will process it after this meeting.
Thank you. And next one is runtime class GA. We have lots of interest to GA runtime class. I put together this document outlining some blocking issues and test coverage that we want to increase. I think we find from test coverage perspective, we have some ideas of what to do to improve it even further. I started a conversation with gvisor team. Maybe we want to run more tests with gvisor, and that will also increase some test coverage. But it's all up to debate. And I think what we propose in this document is good enough already. And we have all the pull requests out. So once they're approved, we will have a good test coverage. So the only question we identified this feature request that may be blocking. And I'm not sure if Tim is on the meeting. I asked him, oh, Tim, you're here? No, it's different team. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Is it? I cannot tell by your black screen whether it's the right team. So I asked. So team proposed a feature that we want to provide the API to configure a default runtime class, and this feature, if we will implement it as an addition to API, maybe blocking GA. We want to implement it before the actual naming the runtime, the API GA. So the decision we need to make is whether you want to go ahead and to implement it, what exactly would be the requirement for default runtime class. So Tim, if you want to jump on, please feel free.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is we sort of have a choice for if we wanted to have a default runtime class, either kind of punting that out to third-party admission controller, to mutating admission controller to set that based on policy. There you can have finer grained controls, like this namespace has a different default from another namespace or whatnot. Or if we want that to make that default selection a kind of built-in part of runtime class. This doesn't necessarily need to be something that blocks GA, but I thought that in case it ends up being being more impactful on the API, it might be something that we should at least discuss before moving forward with GA. So I'm curious if there are any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, the team, on this one, because I think when we start this, I think the default is kind of one hot topic of what we've been talking about, and I want to hear other people's opinion, but I think that time we do think about that's the blocking for the GA, and I'm not sure how we are going to punt that, how long to punt that one, and I do have concern without define those kind of things. So then we may end up missing something after graduate to the GA. And we end up, because we used to have some cases like that before. So then we graduate the GA, but we didn't really think through all those like default use cases and all the config. And then later we found it's not really fit generic use cases. So it's more like so that's why I'm a little concerned. I don't know. I want to hear other people's opinion on this one.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We currently define the defaults in the config of the container runtimes. Right. So if you don't specify which runtime you want of the runtimes, right, we just go ahead and select it. And I believe the default is usually run C.
Yeah, so runtime class to me is an opaque concept independent of even alternate runtime integration choices that people use the feature for, right? If you're using gvisor or Kata or that type of thing. But like runtime class is really like in my mind, the backdoor to pass an opaque set of attributes to some other system. But that opaqueness makes it really hard to say there should be a default. So like, I don't really recall there being good reason why why a default would be desired. And so in my mind, I'm kind of still -1 on there being a need for it, because I don't know what benefit would give.
Yeah, it's more of a cloud configuration issue, right? Isn't it? So.
The default, so how we justify what kind of things we validate, what kind of thing. So I think the ideal world, we validate a lot of those runtime, right? So, but in reality, we basically imply there's the default, right? There's the, and so that's the majority of our tests run against.
But I mean, like, if we have a default runtime class on, does that default differ if it's a Windows versus Linux pod?
Yes.
Yeah, and so then you have 2 defaults. And like I kind of feel like the matrix will grow. Like, I'm thinking back to one of my hesitations when we did runtime class was like ever tying specific behavior to or meeting to a particular runtime class, because it was basically an extension point for vendors to innovate. And like I don't know how we tie very specific behaviors to like this opaque exit point.
My counter argument is what it is the conform test, right? So what will provide we end-to-end experience. I thought that also signaled the CI project, which and initially like the 2 or 3 years ago, Yuji and I start. So we basically have some like hint, some of the implementation say what can it goes to conform, right? So without some like the default level of the runtime, forget about the runtime class, it's new concept, but it just there's some of the default runtime, right? So then that is part of the conform test. So Windows actually is not conformed, right? So that is kind of the when we do the Windows earlier for do the Windows Alpha GA, so how we unblock Windows container, because we try to say propose, okay, here's the additional feature beyond the conform test. Because the huge pushback from the SIG architecture is they say, oh, all the control plane is not to can run on the Windows container. So I went there to talk to them. So let's only support the Windows node. And then Windows control plane, that's a totally separate project, and we can talk about later if needed. But I want to support Windows node to support Windows application, like workload. So, but then we have the question, it is, then what's the conform test? So then we come up like the SIG Node testing, so proposal, which is the additional feature, required feature, must have the feature, and additional feature, all those kind of things. So Windows is there. So forget about the runtime class, what is the default, but I just want to say, we do have the imply something, the default container runtime. And but then we have also endorsed additional container runtime. And because we did the testing, we did the validation, then it's compatible CRI. Then we have like the additional feature. So that's kind of the different level of the support the signal to try to give to users. Forget about all those kind of vendors, but that's kind of community we try to agree. And if the Windows can pass off the conform test, that's then build in like a default feature. So that's kind of the different level we try to maintain velocity, maintain support more feature, but at the same time, there's the basic out-of-box things we can give to our customer, give to users. I mean, not customer, customer have the business, just users. That's the open source perspective, right? I don't know. I'm talking about this one topic, but that's what I originally thought when we talk about the runtime class. Basically, is aligned with the background, the context there.
Yeah, but maybe I know we're over time. We can discuss this separately, I guess, but to me, the pod spec is the default runtime class. And if it's not expressed on the pod spec, then it was outside the purview of defaults, I guess. Either way, we can follow on this afterwards.
Totally. So let's follow up after this one. And I believe there's the other topic, which is Sergey, you mentioned. Basically, just call out attention and remind, and see basically.
Yeah, I want to remind everybody there is a sidecar container meeting doodle out. So Derek, I think we were all waiting for you to tell your availability. We really appreciate your time here. And I wanted to remind that we already have a first CRI alpha to beta meeting, and second one will be tomorrow, 11 to 12 PT Pacific time. There are notes document to check out what happened on the first meeting. Murnal, is it still up?
Yep, it is still on. Mike and I are working up a draft. Hopefully we'll have something to share by tomorrow.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.